If you go all the way back to the earliest days of my channel, you will find this video. In some ways, that video is to thank for the existence of this one. Had that video remained untouched in all of its less than mediocre glory, then perhaps I would have lost all of my interest in The Promised Neverland once that was done and dusted. I would have heard about how terrible Season 2 was all those years ago and just left it at that. But that isn't the case, so here we are today. I enjoyed Season 1 well enough back then, but Season 2 was terrible. I suppose you could call that a faithful adaptation of its source material though, because it's not like the manga fares all that well in the long run. When looking at The Promised Neverland, it's best to simply look at it as two entirely different stories. Season 1 of the anime, which corresponds to the first 37 chapters of the manga, and then everything else. The everything else is what I'm here to talk about today. It was truly fascinating to see the different decisions made by these two different versions of the same story. I think the manga has higher highs but much lower lows than the anime. While the manga has its great moments, Season 2 cuts out a lot of things from the manga, including one of its best arcs, while making heavy edits to the stuff that remains. However, these changes aren't just a result of the anime attempting to patch up holes left by cutting out a bunch of stuff. There are random moments in the anime that are just straight up better than the manga. Part of this is that the manga ends so poorly that even minor improvements in this department feel like monumental jumps in quality, but some of these moments are just good without needing the caveat of the manga's poor ending. I do wonder if some of these improvements came as a direct response to the writing in the manga or if they were completely accidental, but we'll set that speculation aside. In this video, I'm not going to bother with Season 1 because, frankly, I don't want to. When I got around to rewatching Season 1, it was already something I was so familiar with that watching it again didn't spark any particularly new ideas. And once I sat down to actually try and write something about Season 1, I realized that I had nothing I wanted to write or talk about. I feel bad about saying it, but I figure it would be better for me to be honest about this fact instead of fumbling through a forced discussion of Season 1 that my heart really isn't into. I do think a brief summary of Season 1 is warranted in a bit, just in case there's people watching this who haven't seen it but also don't care for spoilers. The timestamp to skip that summary will be in the description, by the way. Your spoiler warning for the video is here and now. This video will contain spoilers for both the anime and the manga of The Promised Neverland. So the premise is as follows. Once again, timestamp in the description if you care to skip this. Season 1 takes place in an orphanage known as Grace Fieldhouse. There, three of the kids, Emma, Norman, and Ray, discover that the children there are being raised as food for demons outside of the farm, so they begin plotting an escape to not just get out, but also to take the other kids of the orphanage with them. The trio eventually rope in two other kids named Dawn and Gilda into their plot, but unfortunately Norman gets shipped out before they can proceed with their escape. During this time, they also discover hints about a mysterious individual named William Minerva who has secretly been sending them messages into the farm through books. The kids also come into possession of a special pen left behind by Sister Crone, a minor antagonist during this arc. Eventually, they burn down the farm and escape with some of the other kids. The youngest kids have been left behind to hold the mother of the house, Isabella, back. Only one of the remaining children, Phil, has been told the truth of the farm by the older kids, and Emma plots to return in 2 years' time to rescue the remaining children. Finding a workable structure to fit the script into was a nightmare for this video, which is why things are going to get pretty messy. Once the anime starts skipping over entire arcs of the story, especially as chapters and arcs become compressed so everything can fit within the allotted number of episodes, it becomes quite tricky to discuss these two versions of the story side by side. We're going to be taking a manga-centric approach, since that's the more complete iteration of the story and only dip into the anime whenever it's relevant. So let's begin with the Promised Forest arc. Things are going to start very slow because there's nothing I can really say about this arc right now. When I reread this arc, it made me realize that the Promised Forest is an extremely important arc with a reasonable argument to be maybe the most important arc to the overarching plot of The Promised Neverland. But there's no way to know this while you're reading without future knowledge because the arc feels so mundane the first time around. As a result, I can't really speak about why I think this arc is so important yet. So just keep in mind that this is something we're going to be coming back to much later on down the line. But there is still some stuff that we can talk about. This arc is about the escaped children experiencing the wilderness for the first time in both positive and negative ways. They get pursued by demons, both wild and hunters, before being saved by a pair of nomadic demons named Mujika and Sonju. These two teach the children how to survive in the wilderness before sending them on their way. At first glance, The Promised Forest is the first of a few arcs whose main purpose is to be a transitory arc that paves the way to the next one. As I said earlier, this arc becomes very important in hindsight, so perhaps The Promised Forest is the most relevant out of all of these transitory setup arcs. While we can't talk about what it sets up to yet, there is one thing that we can talk about right now that's a great example of this, which is the snakes of Alva Pinera. These are a type of carnivorous plant that catch prey through vine traps that I'm going to talk a little too much about because their purpose fascinates me. The kids run into trouble with the snakes but are able to get out pretty much completely unscathed. They do this with the help of the Adventures of Ugo, one of Minerva's coded books that the children realize is a survival guide. The snakes of Alva Pinera isn't the name of the plant, but rather the name of the snakes that appear in the book who behave similarly to the carnivorous plant. So what do these snakes accomplish? The unimportant part happens in this arc where Ray tries to use a vine trap against a wild demon that chases them, but that doesn't amount to anything because the hunter demons kill the wild one. The introduction of the Adventures of Ugo is the important part because that book comes back exactly once in a later arc. It's technically twice because they reference it a second time in The Promised Forest to identify a different plant, but this is so minor that I'm not going to count it. In this later arc, it comes back because Minerva leaves behind a clue that refers to Ugo's pet lemur, Marvine. This whole sequence of setup and payoff for the snakes in the book was always a little weird to me. They dedicate 3 to 4 chapters to establish the purpose of this book, only for it to fall out of relevance shortly after before returning for an extremely brief reference a few arcs down the line, and ultimately, the things that the snakes and the book accomplish are not super important. The Marvine clue from the later arc points to opening a drawer the characters were already standing next to because Marvine sleeps in a drawer. But this is not such an absurd answer that it necessitates this specific of a reference for the involved characters to figure it out, and, as I've said, Ray and the Vine Trap go nowhere. The anime cuts out the initial Snakes of Alva Pinera sequence from The Promised Forest. The kids identifying the water plant and Ray's attempt with the vine trap are still here, with the Adventures of Ugo being brought up both times. However, the future arc that references Marvine the Lemur is removed in its entirety. I don't think the anime really suffers much from the snakes sequence being removed. Part of it is that the central purpose of introducing the snakes in Ugo has been removed as well, so there kind of is no reason for the snakes to exist anymore. Sure, it feels a bit strange when the children are able to immediately recognize the vine trap that we as the viewers are seeing for the first time. But it only happens once, and it doesn't ultimately matter thanks to the hunter demons. All of this is to say that the chapters dedicated to introducing the snakes in Ugo feel pointless to me at the end of the day. When I first began with The Promised Neverland for this video, I hopped back and forth between the Season 2 anime and its corresponding chapters for a little bit, before fully committing to the manga after realizing that there was too much of a discrepancy between the two to continue experiencing things this way. Given this approach, episode 1 of season 2 was the first truly new thing I saw of The Promised Neverland, and that episode felt fine to me when I watched it. It was a little shocking at first when I read the corresponding chapters and discovered that there was a major difference between the two mediums right from the beginning, what with the children disappearing suddenly. But once I got past the initial part with the snakes, it didn't really feel like I had missed out on much. If I read the manga first then watched the episode, then maybe I'd feel different about this, but who knows. When it comes to the Adventures of Ugo being used as a coded survival guide, it's a cute idea that loses its purpose very quickly because Sonju and Mujika teach the children pretty much everything they need to know about surviving in the wild. And as far as Marvine goes, there's Chekhov's gun and all, but that part could have been rewritten to just be the characters digging around in the drawers of a table that's suspiciously all alone in a room, and the payoff would have been largely the same, I think. One more difference between the anime and the manga that we can talk about right now is Chapter 50. 50 has this piece of art in it, which is not present in the anime in any way, shape, or form. In this chapter, it's revealed that Grace Fieldhouse is one of only 4 top-class farms. There are several hundreds of other farms out there that are designed for mass production where the children are raised in truly abhorrent conditions to simply be shipped out. The children in these mass production farms have no names, can't understand words, and lack the free will to even consider the possibility of escape. This one panel paints a truly dark picture of the whole situation. It helps create this feeling that the escapees' goal of returning to the farms and freeing the children is a genuinely impossible task. Not only are there hundreds of farms out there, even if you manage to help the children out, they would not survive due to how grossly underdeveloped they are as a result of the horrid conditions they've been through. Yet this reveal is removed from the anime. This is what I'd probably consider to be the first major departure from the manga that the anime has committed to. The manga spends maybe a quarter or a third of a chapter to address this topic, and in this pretty short amount of time, I think it does a great job of not only creating this feeling of impossibility, but also a sense of how massive the world the children just entered might be. It really does make the children feel small and disempowered. In the anime, the story feels a lot more localized. The anime focuses on just the farm that the children escaped from. These are the only humans that need to be saved. It paints a very clear and very fathomable endpoint for the story to head towards, making the world of the anime feel a lot smaller and less devastating. It's a weird feeling because the worlds of the manga and the anime have been otherwise identical so far, but that's probably why this difference feels so much more significant. The reveal was a weighty turning point in my perception of the manga's world, so the lack of it ends up becoming this equally weighty turning point in how I viewed the anime's world. I think a big factor in this also has to do with the fact that I read this part of the manga first before watching the associated episode. I immediately noticed the missing reveal, and thus was able to appreciate how much this reveal added to the story. The removal of the snakes might be more total chapters and content lost, but the removal of this single piece of art is much more impactful, which is why I said this was a major departure. Moving on, the next arc in line is Search for Minerva. The most important part of this arc is the children using the special pen to navigate to a bunker left behind for them by Minerva located at coordinate B0632. Inside are plentiful provisions, electricity, running water, bathrooms, bedding, a garden, and, who could forget, one whole adult man. He hates the children. He wants them out. He wants them out so bad that he will hold one of them at gunpoint. This mysterious man is the heart and soul of the Search for Minerva arc. In the manga, it is a goddamn ordeal to figure out what his name is because he simply refuses to tell anybody. For the sake of convenience, we'll skip that ordeal. His name is Yugo. Yugo is my favorite character in The Promised Neverland for one main reason. He is an unapologetic piece of shit in Search for Minerva, and I love him all the more for it. Among all of the antagonists in the series, both major and minor, Yugo stands out to me because of this complete disinterest in wanting to play a role in anything greater. He does not care that the demons are eating the children. He does not care that the Gracefield escapees want to save the remaining children someday. He plays no part in either perpetuating or resisting the state of the world. He likes his bunker and wants everyone else to get out. That is all. Compared to the hope and encouragement that Mujika and Sonju gave to the children in the Promised Forest, Yugo brings an overwhelming amount of negativity to the table. So much of this story is about having unrelenting hope in the face of adversity, but Yugo's introduction is so rude and unwelcoming that he feels like an unmovable wall, even more so than the literal wall surrounding the house. His presence is also pretty refreshing, giving Emma's unflinching optimism and determination, which persists throughout the Promised Neverland. This arc has 2 ultimate goals it accomplishes: the children trying to figure out who Yugo is, and the children attempting to convince him to take them to Goldy Pond, the next destination Minerva points to. An important aspect to understanding the dynamic between the children, specifically Emma, and Yugo is Yugo's worldview. He escaped in a group from a farm known as Glorybell 13 years before the events of the manga, but he is now the only one remaining. According to him, the key to survival is to eliminate all useless things, such as companions, hope, and compassion. It completely opposes everything that the children value not just now, but for the remainder of the entire story. The value of companions, hope, and compassion are easily 3 of the most important things in the Promised Neverland, and it brings me joy to see someone so idealistically opposed to all 3 of these things in a way that no other antagonist in the series can quite accomplish. So Emma destroys Yugo's balls, and then the children find a self-destruction switch for the bunker. The kids use this switch to threaten Yugo into taking them to Goldy Pond, to which he finally obliges. This results in Yugo, Emma, and Ray going through a forest full of wild demons, which is another fun section of the story. Yugo continues to be completely obnoxious when acting as a guide, but with the added layer of tension of him trying to decide on which one of Emma or Ray he should kill. The forest section is also used as a clever way to teach the reader about basic demon anatomy, which is going to become very important as the story moves along into later arcs and we need to start killing some demons. This is where the kids learn that a demon's critical weak point is their eye, because their core is located behind it. In the anime, since the kids never get this hands-on opportunity to learn about demon anatomy, Sonju simply tells them about the eye when they part ways. So how do the kids crack the shell? How do they get Yugo to open up? That question is answered in chapter 64 when Emma decides to confront Yugo directly about his antagonism towards them. She addresses the unending trauma he must have experienced from losing all of his companions on the path to Goldy Pond, and how it must be difficult for him to see this new group of escapees enter the bunker like he did 13 years ago. But then she hits him with the cold, hard truth. Yugo getting rid of the children in one way or another will not undo his suffering, and so Emma makes him an offer to join them in rescuing the children, which all leads up into this panel. For what? This panel stands as one of the most powerful panels in the entire manga for me. It's a moment for Yugo to reflect upon not just the present moment, but the years he spent since losing all of his companions. What has the sacrifices of all of his friends amounted to since he's stayed huddled up inside his bunker all alone, reliving the past with no future in sight? No matter how much he regrets it, Yugo can't change the past, and his dead friends won't return, but maybe, just maybe, the Gracefield children appearing at the bunker is what his friends' sacrifices have led up to give Yugo a chance to survive, so that he may play a role in reshaping the world and make sure those sacrifices weren't in vain. And how great is that? Just an earnest plea from Emma for Yugo to have faith in companions, hope, and compassion once more. For me, this is a candidate for one of the best moments in the whole story, and it's one that only gets better once we get to the next arc. Now the question becomes, how does the anime handle this? In the anime, the children use the special pen to navigate to a bunker left behind for them by Minerva, located at coordinate B0632. Inside are plentiful provisions, electricity, running water, bathrooms, bedding, a garden, you know that, and of course, who could forget? Nothing else. Yugo isn't in the anime. This is what I can only assume to be a consequence of the anime removing the subsequent Goldy Pond arc. Because Goldy Pond doesn't exist in the anime, the children don't need a guide to take them there, and because the children don't need a guide, Yugo doesn't need to exist anymore. In that case, what becomes of Search for Minerva in the anime? A whole lot of nothing, unfortunately. The anime compresses Search for Minerva together with not the upcoming Goldy Pond arc, but the arc after that. But because Yugo isn't there, the kids just don't do anything inside the bunker that's interesting throughout the 1.5 episodes they spend in it. They do leave the bunker eventually, but we can't talk about that just yet because in the manga that happens 2 arcs from now. But the most fascinating part about the removal of Yugo is that the anime makes references to this character. The first one is the cookie tin. When the kids meet Yugo for the first time in the manga, he's munching on some cookies, but in the anime, all the kids see is a tin of moldy cookies sitting on the table. The cookies don't matter that much because they're a much more egregious example that exists, one that I cannot believe they actually put in the anime in the state that it's in. This would be the help room. In the manga, this room exists, but the main difference here is that instead of help, it says poachers on the wall, in reference to the poachers who hunted down Yugo's friend all those years ago. This is supposed to be Yugo's trauma room of sorts, and it is quite the scene to behold. Trying to look at all the stuff on the wall and attempting to deduce what might have happened and what each section of the wall could mean adds a lot of mystery to the bunker and Yugo, but if Yugo isn't in the anime anymore, what purpose does the room serve? In episode 3, they use this room as one of 2 cliffhangers, the other one being a phone call from Minerva, which replaces the letter from Minerva that the kids find in the bunker. And when I watched the anime, I thought this cliffhanger was pretty solid, enough to make me want to watch one more episode when I initially planned on stopping there for the night. Keep in mind that the anime was my first introduction to the bunker, so I had no idea what this room was supposed to be about when I first saw it. After this cliffhanger, however, they never talk about this room again. If they took this room and repurposed it for something interesting, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Hell, if they repurposed it for anything at all, I probably wouldn't have a problem with it. It's a good cliffhanger and sets up the idea that there's something secretly wrong with this bunker that the children will soon find out. But nope, nothing comes of it. I think if I had read the manga first before coming into this episode, I would find this to be kind of insulting. Cutting out an important character is one thing, but then to leave behind a vital part of this character and do nothing to reframe or recontextualize it so that it makes at least a little bit of sense for anime-only people is crazy to me. There's one more thing we'll talk about in regards to the anime's bunker arc. I can't even really call this Search for Minerva because it was gutted so badly that it may as well just be something else entirely. In episode 4, there's a scene around 4 minutes long that involves the kids going outside of the bunker to look for food. Two of the younger kids, Toma and Lani, find a bunch of what I can only describe as slugfish and bring it back to the bunker with them. They cook it and it looks gross, but when they try it, it's actually pretty good, so everyone has some of it for dinner that night. In isolation, there's nothing wrong with this scene. I don't find it particularly interesting, but there's also nothing here that I would label as bad. But does it also add anything to the story? Not really, and again, that would be fine if it wasn't for the fact that this is occupying space that could have been used up by more important story pieces. And knowing just how much was removed from the original story and especially Search for Minerva, it's hard not to look at this scene and not be annoyed by it. Ultimately, the anime's iteration for Search for Minerva feels directionless, whereas the manga's iteration is excellent. As far as the arcs that are intact are concerned, I would say that Search for Minerva is the one that suffers the most from the changes made by the anime. Even calling it just changes feels a little generous because of how little of the arc remains here, but alas. Onwards to Goldy Pond. From what I've seen online, a lot of people consider Goldy Pond Battle to be their favorite arc, and it's easy to see why. It's not my favorite arc in the story, but I still do really like it. Both the plot twist about the truth of Goldy Pond and the ending to this arc are some of the most memorable moments in the entire story. There's quite a few interesting revelations about several characters and the world at large, and it's also a much more action-packed section of the story compared to most other arcs. It's also a convenient and straightforward arc for me to talk about since the anime doesn't bother with it, which means we only need to talk about the manga for the next little bit. At least Goldy Pond got mercy killed and cleanly cut out of the story instead of being wounded then dragged through the mud like Search for Minerva was. I do love the plot twist of Goldy Pond not being some sort of sanctuary set aside by Minerva, but instead being a secret hunting ground for a small handful of elite demons. First of all, that's just an extremely cool idea for this kind of story, but I also enjoy how lovingly the town seems to be constructed, so much so that it looks more like an amusement park than somewhere people would actually live. The appearance of the Music Monsters Survive sign is genuinely eerie, and the sheer contrast of the Wonderland-esque town with the emerging demons is just fantastic. Another thing about the sudden nature of this plot twist that works really nicely for the manga's favor is that the manga jumps straight into the action. I'm not a huge stickler for the very famous show don't tell rule of writing, since I think the circumstances should determine whether or not you should show or tell, but here's a great example of it. Immediately getting to see the contrast between the demons and this whimsically built village is going to be 1,000 times more effective than reading someone explain it. Watching the kids killing the demons is definitely the most unique part of this arc. As I said just a bit ago, this arc is the most action-packed section of the story, but if the fights against the demons were just hype and aura, I wouldn't really speak much of it. What I appreciate the most about these fights is how much strategy has to go into them. From a raw strength and durability perspective, the demons clear the kids any day of the week, so the kids have to come up with some other ways to deal with them. They only have 5 of these special mask-destroying bullets to deal with the 5 demons, but, and here's the important part, because each demon has their own unique strengths, weaknesses, and personalities, This calls for different strategies for each and every demon instead of simply shooting one demon with one bullet. And it feels like each encounter had a lot of consideration put into them. For example, Luce relies fully on the strength of his underlings to get anything done, so when his underlings are eliminated, he's effectively powerless. As a result, Nigel and Jillian are able to kill him pretty easily without the use of these special rounds. On the other hand, Noose and Numa become extremely tricky when Noose eats Numa after she dies and the kids are too freaked out by the sight of this to fire. There probably would have been some serious casualties were it not for Yugo arriving just in time. Luvis proves to be so powerful, resilient, and adaptable that it requires several changes of plans, including throwing a whole fucking house at him, and even then they barely outnumber and overpower him. The bit with the special blinding bullet is also very cool, a literal Chekhov's gun with that one. Another very cool thing that happens in Goldy Pond is how it unfolds the world. That is to say, it reveals a lot of information about stuff that lies beyond the boundaries of Goldy Pond. The identities and motivations of Minerva, the existence of the Lambda Project, and, of course, what happened to Norman after he was shipped out. The chapters involved in this sequence of reveals feel almost dizzying in a way with how much information is thrown to the viewer at once. It's also paired with one of the most ridiculous sequences in the whole manga where they open up a hidden door under a windmill to discover a secret surveillance room only to discover another secret door that leads to a golden pond with an elevator inside. The Marvine drawer is in here, by the way. As you might guess, the most important reveal amidst all of this is what happened to Norman. Unfortunately, the fact that Norman is still alive is something that I was already spoiled on a very long time ago. In fact, it's basically the only thing I knew about in the post-escape section of The Promised Neverland. Still, that didn't detract from how outstanding the cliffhanger at the end of 73 was. Actual shivers up my spine with that one. That being said, I do think the manga was a little too trigger-happy with exploring this cliffhanger. The manga immediately pivots away from Goldy Pond to go see what Norman's been up to with chapter 74, and I wish that it didn't do this. I wish the manga had let the suspense of the cliffhanger linger for longer. A lot longer, as a matter of fact, since I don't think what we see in 74 is enough. The time that Norman spends at the Lambda facility is an extremely critical component to his character, and it definitely deserved more chapters to properly explore it. This could also be easily fitted into one of the later arcs for when he properly re-enters the story. This is the only issue that I have with Goldy Pond, even though I do think it's a pretty hefty issue. By far and away, my favorite moment in Goldy Pond has got to be the end to the Luvis hunt when Yugo shows up on the rooftops. Yugo has made it to Goldy Pond to literally confront his demons from 13 years ago. When reading chapter 64 from the prior arc, one line that stuck out to me as particularly poignant was, "No matter how much he regrets it, he can't change the past and his dead friends won't return." Emma's speech motivates him to move past his regrets and finally take a step forward from his 13-year stasis inside the bunker, and this allows him to symbolically change his past. Because of his decision to enter Goldy Pond and help with both killing Noose and Luvis, his dead friend Lucas has returned to him. I completely missed this connection on both my first and second time reading the chapter and only noticed it when I was quickly skimming through it for writing the part on Search for Minerva, but man, I am so glad that I noticed it because I think it really helps tie everything in Goldy Pond together. Next on the docket is Cuvitidala. This is another one that I would consider to be a transitory setup arc. This one can be very comfortably split into two halves, the stuff that happens before the bunker gets raided, and then the actual raid on the bunker itself. The anime did not adapt the stuff that happens before the raid on the bunker, and honestly, I don't really have much to say about it either. Back in the Promised Forest, as the kids were saying goodbye to the two demons, Mujika secretly told Emma to seek out the Seven Walls, giving her a pendant while doing so, and here they are now, however many chapters later, attempting to do just that. There's nothing about this section that I think is outright bad, but I do think it is boring, which, depending on who you are, could be even worse than being bad. As I said, Cuvitidala is a transitory setup arc, and most of the stuff that happens outside of the bunker won't really come to fruition until later arcs. The most notable thing that happens in this pre-bunker raid section of the arc is the vision Emma has at Cuvitidala of the ancient demon ritual and the demon in it, telling her to come through the proper entrance. If you found that interesting, that's great. I did not, so I'm not going to continue talking about it. There are a few odd things here and there in this section, although I wouldn't categorize any of these as criticisms. At the end of chapter 98, there's a single panel of some guy sitting on a rock referring to the kids as young boys and girls. I want to say this is Norman, given that we can see him later on wearing a very similar cloak to this, but it's weird to me that he would refer to the kids as young boys and girls when he's the same age as the oldest kids in the bunch. Similarly, in chapter 103, the kids pass by this black cloak demon while they investigate a temple related to the Seven Walls. They specifically point him out, show him in several panels, and then do nothing with him. After this chapter, this demon never shows up again, and no one mentions him either. How bizarre. I do like his flock of demon birds and their little T-Rex arms, though. In chapter 99, Ray says that Latin was the common language of ancient Rome and its empire. There's a strangeness to this statement that I just cannot shake off, because when I read this, all I could think about was whether or not demons were involved in the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. It's stated that the promise was made 1,000 years ago, and it's currently 2046, so that would have been around the year 1000. What other historical events before the year 1000 did the demons get to witness firsthand? While the anime never mentions ancient Rome, they have their own little weird tie-in with the real world in episode 5. In it, you can see that somebody wrote down Japanese ginseng, so Japan is also now a canon part of the Promised Neverland. I do find these mentions to be a little immersion breaking. The idea that demons, these horrific and fantastical creatures, existed in the same world as the ancient Rome and Japan that exist in the world I live in, is this membrane of weirdness that I simply cannot get past for whatever reason. The last thing we'll talk about before we get to the raid is the time skip. Once the kids come back from Cuvitidala, there's a time skip of a little over a year before the kids go explore the temple. It's written off as the kids, now with the 2 adults and children from Goldy Pond chilling in the bunker and living their lives while scouting out various locations with possible ties to the Seven Walls. What I find odd about the time skip is not the reasoning behind it. I understand why the time skip is here. It turns out that a lot of these locations amounted to very little, so showing the kids hitting up every single one of them for nothing would be pretty dull. What I find odd about this is the sheer amount of time skipped. A majority of the Promised Neverland takes place over the course of 2 years. To skip over half of this time in such an unceremonious way like this feels as if the story is in a bit of a rush right now. It comes off as a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation to me, and I do not envy this position one bit. So that's all of the not bunker raid stuff out of the way, which means we can talk about the bunker raid itself. Starting with chapter 103, the bunker comes under attack from human raiders deployed by the Rotary clan. I quite like the bunker raid for one main reason, that being the leader of the raiders, Andrew. This guy is a straight up monster with 0 ounces of mercy for the children, but that's what makes him so compelling to watch. His squad is extremely well coordinated and constantly communicating to quickly corner the kids into the tunnels. I love that he views the children as mistakes that cannot come to light, which is effectively reflected through Andrew killing 2 children in the tunnels without hesitation. He doesn't flinch at Emma's attempted plea towards the humanity he doesn't have. Hugo and Lucas going back in to kill the raiders and go out in a blaze of glory is fucking awesome, because these 2 are just as coordinated as the raiders and equally brutal in the way they retaliate. Andrew surviving the explosion and pursuing the children into the forest is probably my favorite part about the bunker raid. His two-face game is on point and he finally looks like the monster that he is on the inside. But his death is what I like the most about this part. A wild demon rolls up behind him, eats him, and then pieces out. As funny as his death is, it does thematically check out. After having survived the explosion, Andrew repeats several times that the heavens were on his side all along, and even before that, he kept calling the children food over and over. And how does he die? Because he got unlucky, and a demon happened to be right there when it was most inconvenient, and he got eaten. Kind of reminds me of Kira getting backed over by an ambulance at the end of Diamond is Unbreakable. One thing I like a lot about The Promised Neverland is its tendency to use a lot of human characters as antagonists rather than demons. It would be easier to write about some scary demons that only care to eat the children, but humans occupy a complicated space in The Promised Neverland, and their motivations have to be greatly shaped by this peculiar world that surrounds them. Isabella and Crone during Jailbreak try to raise the children while fully knowing the death that awaits almost all of them beyond the gate. Hugo in Search for Minerva has his defensive, selfish attitude formed by the trauma he experienced on the way to Goldy Pond. Andrew here in Cuvitidala is a ruthless killing machine that serves to uphold the system that oppresses his fellow humans. The other ones we'll eventually get to are also pretty great for this, and I think this is one of the strongest parts of The Promised Neverland. And now we must ask the million-dollar question. How does the anime handle the bunker raid? The answer to that question is very, very poorly. The anime's iteration of the raid is so boring. It is unbelievable how boring it is. The raiders have no dedicated leader, which means that the most interesting part of the raid isn't there. The anime's raiders have zero personality and come off as quite incompetent. A handful of the raiders are dispatched with a few arrows. One of the raiders sees Dawn alone in a room, and the first thing he does is lower his guard instead of trying to capture him. And when the demon pops out of the woods to finish off the last few raiders, they don't even react until they start to get eaten. When one of these nameless raiders tells the kids that they have no right to a normal life to begin with, he delivers it with zero impact and charisma, and it is just so much less interesting than when Andrew says it. I specifically brought up the bit about human antagonists a minute ago because of this. The anime's raiders feel like headless chickens running around in the dark rather than the precise task force they were in the manga. Without their leader, they feel purposeless and are more of a minor inconvenience than a genuine threat. The random nature of Andrew's death had a point, but in the anime, it's just random. The one thing the anime's raid does do ever so slightly better than the manga is that they show off the tunnels before the raid happens. The tunnels in the manga do feel like they appear out of thin air, which would be my only criticism of the manga's bunker raid, I guess. The anime uses the bunker raid as their reasoning for a time skip, which conveniently segues us into our next arc. Those of you familiar with the source material might have wondered why I've neglected to mention some very crucial details when talking about previous arcs. I said earlier that there were some things that we couldn't talk about until later, and this is the beginning of that. King of Paradise is my favorite arc in the manga, and what I would consider to be the most important arc in the manga as well. The most important thing that this arc does is that it establishes the premise of the climax, but in order for that to make sense, I need to cover a few things. All the way back in the Promised Forest, Sonju revealed to Emma and Rei that there are two separate worlds, a human world and a demon world, and that they are currently in the demon world. The world was split a long time ago by a promise made between the humans and the demons, involving some mysterious location known as the Seven Walls, and because of this promise, no one can cross between the two worlds. The reason the kids were looking for the Seven Walls earlier is so that they can attempt to change this and eventually escape to the human world with the kids from all the other farms. We also need to understand how demons work, or rather, what demons are. Why do some demons look like feral beasts, while others look like insects, and some get to look fine as hell? This fact is explained in King of Paradise. Demons are organisms who change shape based on what they eat. The reason why they crave humans so much is because eating humans allowed demons to gain intelligence and also start developing their own culture and society. The wild demons out in nature are simply the same organisms that never got the chance to eat humans. The catch is that if a demon doesn't get to eat humans for a little while, they begin to degenerate, and once enough time has passed, they fully degenerate into a wild, unintelligent form. These things are important to know because, drumroll please, Norman is back. He is the King of Paradise, a secret sanctuary where all the children that Norman and his personal crew have rescued can live in peace. When he was shipped out, Norman was sent to the Lambda facility, a special facility where they experiment on the children to try and find a way to quickly and easily raise high-quality products that would normally take a significant amount of time and effort as it does with the current high-quality farms. He plotted a breakout and successfully escaped alongside other Lambda children. Since then, he has taken on the task of filling William Minerva's shoes, as the real one had been dead before the events of The Promised Neverland. One thing I like a lot about Norman's reappearance is how much older he looks now than he did back at the farm. All the other kids from Gracefield have gotten older too. There's a shift in the art style that I think contributes to this quite a bit. While I don't exactly know why, Norman just looks so much older, not just compared to his previous self, but also when compared to the other Gracefield kids. We do know the experimentation from Lambda can sometimes make you look older than you actually are, such as this 5-year-old, so maybe that contributes to this, but I don't know. Anyways, I like Norman looking so much older for 2 reasons. Firstly, it really helps sell the feeling that it has been a long time since the kids last saw each other. For the readers or watchers, it's just been some number of chapters or episodes, but for these kids, it's been over a year and a half, close to 2. I can remember the feeling of seeing family I haven't seen in years again and still being able to recognize them despite both them and I getting older and not actively keeping in touch. This scene reminds me a lot of that. Secondly, he's been playing the role of William Minerva, an undeniably adult human, and I think giving Norman a more adult look is appropriate for this new role he's taken on. He's become the leader of a whole new revolution since we last saw him, so he looks the part, and looks a lot like Minerva too. This is part of the reason why I really wish the manga didn't spoil Norman's return all the way back in Goldy Pond. It felt so doomed when Norman was shipped out back in Season 1, so his return feels very meaningful. It would have been a good payoff to the amazing cliffhanger about Adam back in Goldy Pond. But the fact that they spoiled that he's fine back then meant that this moment was an inevitability rather than an important reveal. His return is already really good with it being spoiled to the readers, so just imagine how great it would be if it wasn't. This also would have made for the perfect spot to unveil Norman's backstory like they did back in Goldy Pond. Norman already briefly describes what happened to him while he was gone here, so it's not like it would require some dramatic restructuring to accommodate for this edition. Plus, it would further help set the stage for my favorite chapter in The Promised Neverland, which would be 127. This is when Emma confronts Norman about the fact that she doesn't want to kill the demons like he does, which establishes the conflict that will culminate into the major climax of the story. I like this chapter a lot because of how unmoved Norman is by Emma's innocent perspective. Nobody in the room dismisses her ideas or berates her perspective, but rather states that there is no peaceful solution that would be effective. Emma was clearly moved by the show of humanity from the demons, such as Mujika and Sonju demonstrating kindness when they first escaped, or the demon children in the settlements playing just like human children do. My favorite example of this, for how mundane it is, was seeing Emma be surprised by watching Mujika and Sonju say grace before a meal, just like the kids did back at the farm. These demons who live in either small communities or on their own have no say in the oppression of humans. Even the word demon is a label that the children of Gracefield gave them after Emma and Norman's traumatic first encounter with them at the gate. Sonju mentions how he remembers being called a demon once, and Yugo also refers to them as man-eaters. I don't believe there's an official title for this species, but regardless, there are many of them out there who are ordinary and not the monsters that the word demon might suggest them to be. However, humans as a food source is a deeply integral component to the functioning of demon society. It's not just a form of sustenance or a tool for creating disparity, it's a structural pillar that the entire thing is built upon, and removing it would cause it to completely collapse. And this is where Mujika steps back into the picture. It's revealed in 127 that Mujika is a special, one-of-a-kind demon known as the evil-blooded girl who appeared on record 700 years ago. Her blood has a special property where, if a demon consumes it, they will no longer degenerate and thus will never need to eat humans ever again. But when the aristocrats found out about her, they rounded up all of the demons affected by her blood, proceeding to slaughter and eat them to absorb these qualities. Despite Mujika's blood being a peaceful and effective solution to solving the ongoing degeneration crisis of the commoner demons, the aristocrats didn't want this, as it would do away with their ability to create disparity and control society as a result of said disparity. Even though the solution seems very convenient on paper, it does come with its caveats. Sure, using this blood to transform these demons would probably result in some of these demons no longer desiring to eat humans, but as Norman says, just because some will doesn't mean that all will. As seen by the Goldy Pond arc, there are demons out there who simply view humans as lesser beings, and there's nothing that can be done about this fact. Hell, there's even humans that view humans as lesser than demons on this side of the world. Just because there is no need to eat humans anymore, that won't magically suppress the appetites and change the perspectives of the demons, especially when you see how coveted some of the best raised children are. You can't simply pick and choose only the demons that would never eat a human again and use them to rebuild demon society from the ground up, because what would you do with all of the demons that won't comply? Even if the children were to somehow reach the seven walls and create a new promise that removes humans from the demon world, there's no guarantee that the human world is a safe and welcoming bastion for the children to return to. While Emma claims that leaving the demon world untouched and going to the human world would still be better than annihilating the demons, I disagree. While those with the magical blood will be fine, the countless demons that don't have this blood would slowly begin to degenerate, wearing down the humanity in them that Emma was moved so deeply by in the first place. That too is a form of annihilation, one of society rather than species. According to Norman, if humans want to have a guaranteed future in this world, demons must be fully and indiscriminately annihilated. 127 is a rather radicalizing chapter, and that's probably why I like it so much. Norman has returned to the story with a very renewed sense of purpose, and the manga lays out his reasoning for demon genocide in a very clear and unabashed way. One of the final lines in the chapter is, "Life isn't so easy that you can have everything you want." Norman says it in response to Emma claiming that they can make a new promise and escape to the human world. The expression on his face as he says it gives off signs of exasperation, and it's also the first time in the chapter that he's just being blunt with her. It's like he's growing tired of her insistence upon an ideal outcome, even though he's laid out the facts and his reasoning for everything he wants to do. 127 really does a wonderful job in making you think about which of these two perspectives will come out on top. Will there be some sort of compromise, or will some third perspective rise to the occasion? Will there be any lasting consequences to the relationship between Emma and Norman? We can only wait and find out. And now I'm sure some people are thinking, it's great and all that you like that chapter, but I want to hear about how the anime ruined it. Please tell me all about how the anime fucked up your favorite part of the manga. Unfortunately, the anime's handling of 127 is pretty alright. Most of it is very similar, but there are a few changes that I do like. Not necessarily improvements to the source material, but still good changes, I think. In the anime, Norman seems even more unshakable than he is in the manga. In the manga, he seems to try and placate Emma a bit without compromising on his position, but he doesn't do that here, and I think that's not a bad change. It adds a bit more tension to the scene. But my favorite change made to this scene, and one that I think is a genuine improvement to the manga's version, is when Ray asks Norman why he's so anxious. But Norman ignores the question and tries to head out. It's such a weirdly important question in this context. Why does Norman seem so desperate about putting his plans into motion? Obviously, there's simply the fact that he hates demons and wants to see them annihilated. But anyone that has read the manga or is rewatching Season 2 for some reason would know that Norman is slowly dying as a result of what happened to him at Lambda. This manifests in the form of a seizure, even resulting in coughing up blood, so that's another arguably more pressing issue for Norman, to see everything get done before the clock stops ticking. I don't know if they wrote that line in with that intention because it's just so casually slipped in, but it's something I didn't think about at all when watching Season 2 for the first time. It weirdly stuck out to me during the rewatch as a short, simple, but highly effective bit of writing. Outside of 127 though, the anime's adaptation of King of Paradise is awkwardly handled. First things first, the way the kids reunite with Norman is vastly different. In the manga, the kids were able to collect one last message from Minerva Norman before having to flee the bunker, and the message guides them to an eventual reunion with Norman. In the anime, the kids start living out of the Temple of Evil Blood after escaping the bunker and are visiting a nearby demon settlement to look for food. There, they just happen to run into Norman and his Lambda crew. The anime's reunion with Norman is much less interesting because it feels like a complete coincidence. The manga's reunion feels a lot more deliberate in its execution, not because of Minerva specifically messaging the bunker, but also because Jin, Hayato, and Zazie were sent out looking for them. Time restraint seems like the reason why this change was made to me, explaining the message, running into Jin and Hayato, and then eventually Zazie, the side quest into one of the mass production farms to get medicine for Chris, and then getting to and showing off Paradise would all take time that the anime doesn't have. so just have them run into each other in the village and move on. That being said, they did spend like 4 minutes in episode 4 just goofing around with the slugfish, so I don't know, maybe those 4 minutes could have been spent doing anything else. The whole village section in the anime is also just as awkward. The village section in the manga is straightforward and, most importantly, completely irrelevant. It shows Emma, Ray, Gilda, Dawn, and 2 of the Goldy Pond kids named Zack and Violet passing through a village in their demon disguises. Dawn's weird feet get spotted, so they have to get out of the village, but that's the end of that. Nothing consequential happens here. The anime decides to expand upon this, and the first big change is the lack of Goldy Pond. Because Goldy Pond never happened, Zack and Violet don't exist in the anime, and so their shoes have been literally filled by Toma and Lanny, 2 of the younger Gracefield escapees I mentioned earlier. These 2 accidentally give away the fact that they're humans while interacting with a pair of demons, and those demons give chase. Emma and Ray split off from the rest of the kids to divert the demons' attention, which eventually leads to them reuniting with Norman. Those 2 demons are also a pretty notable addition to the village bit. These 2 have a bit of backstory and a decent amount of dialogue as they chase the kids before Sazi kills them and the anime just forgets about them. They're not entirely pointless, since the younger siblings of these 2 demons do make an extremely brief reappearance later on, but I still can't get over how uneventfully they're disposed of. That being said, how great are these 2 demon kids though? Not because they're interesting characters or anything, but because their messed up forms actually showcase some of the suffering the lower class demons have to endure as a result of the class divide. It's a little addition, but still definitely a worthwhile one. One last thing for King of Paradise. In chapter 129, there's this bit about how Norman says in order to save everyone, he'll gladly become a god or a devil, and the page looks like this. While it sounds like I'm setting things up to make fun of this page, there's nothing wrong with it. The worst crime it commits is giving off a little too much "I'm 14 and this is deep" energy, but I guess Norman must be like 13 or 14 at this point. They show off this page right after Norman and Emma have their big talk in 127, right at the end of a scene where Norman talks with his Lambda crew in a basement. The reason I bring it up is because for some reason, the anime messes with the timing of this moment. The basement scene is in the correct spot, taking place right after Norman and Emma's big talk, but for some reason, the angle or your devil bit takes place on a cliff where Norman is delivering a monologue to nobody 2/3 of the way through the episode after the basement scene. I have no idea why they put this where they did. We go from watching the kids search for Mujika and Sonju in the woods before cutting to Norman's clifftop monologue like an ad break and then resuming the search. I just don't get it. The Seven Walls arc is similar to the Cuvitidala arc in a few ways. It's another transitory setup arc, and I also think that the actual namesake of the arc isn't all that interesting. There's a lot of visual shenanigans happening, and that's cool, but I don't really care too much for what actually happens. Emma does get to meet the Wish Demon properly and creates a new promise, but we don't get to find out the specific details until later. As far as the anime is concerned, the actual Seven Walls part of the Seven Walls arc isn't adapted, and for how big of a deal the Seven Walls and the Wish Demon is in the manga, the removal of it in the anime doesn't actually change a whole lot of things. Well, that's not entirely true. There are some pretty notable changes, but these changes don't really impact the overall story. For an example we'll get to later, there's the anime's ending, which is a little different, but ultimately accomplishes the same thing as the manga's ending. But an example we can talk about here and now is how the anime handles Norman and Emma's deal. So right as they're about to wrap up the conversation where Emma talks about her empathy for demons, she tries to cut a deal with Norman. In the manga, the deal is that she and Ray will go to the Seven Walls to make a new promise that will hopefully mean that Norman won't have to proceed with his plans for demon annihilation. Norman allows this to happen, but makes it clear that he has no intention of stalling out his plans to wait for their return. In the anime, since the Seven Walls were removed, this deal needed to be changed. Instead of going to the Seven Walls, Emma decides to go find and bring back Sonju and Mujika in exchange for Norman not killing the demons. Norman gives her 5 days to do this before he puts his plans into motion. This change fascinates me because this is something that happens in the manga. There is a group dedicated to finding Sonju and Mujika out in the wild. Except in the manga, it consists of Dawn, Gilda, Hayato, and a newly introduced character named Aish. In both the anime and the manga, Norman begins his attack while Emma and Rei are gone. The targets of his attack are different though. He attacks the Imperial capital in the manga and attacks an unnamed demon settlement in the anime. The most important scene of the next arc requires Norman to meet up with Emma and Rei again, and how they go about doing this is also different. In the manga, once Emma has wrapped up her business in the Seven Walls, she gets spit back out into paradise where Rei, who was kicked out earlier than her, brings her up to date about what Norman's been up to, at which point they head to the capital. The anime approaches this in a much more roundabout way. Emma and Rei, along with Dawn and Gilda, but no Hayato and Aish because they don't exist in the anime, are able to find Mujika and Sonju in the wild, but then they hear a loud noise and immediately deduce that Norman has begun his attack. I think the way the anime handled it gets the job done. I also think the way the anime handled it is hilarious. First of all, how lucky they are that the unnamed demon settlement happens to be within explosion earshot of where Mujika and Sonju happen to be in the middle of the forest. Secondly, there's this shot of Norman watching the settlement burn down from atop a cliff. It looks pretty far away to me, but then like 30 seconds later, he's at the village while it's still burning down. Yes, we can and should approach fictional stories with at least some amount of suspension of disbelief, because just watching someone ride a horse through a forest is not the most interesting thing ever, but the instant cut between the two scenes is so jarring because the anime made a point to show off the distance in the first scene before completely disregarding it for the second. Thirdly, this shot is just ridiculous. Let's also talk about Mujika's pendant while we're at it. In the manga, the pendant allows Emma to have a glimpse into the Seven Walls when she arrives at Cuvitidala, but since the Seven Walls aren't in the anime, what becomes of the pendant? When the kids are out searching for Sonju and Mujika, they get attacked by a wild demon and Emma drops the pendant. Mujika finds the pendant on the ground and begins to look around for the kids and eventually finds them. The easiest thing for the anime to do would have simply been to not even bother with the pendant and have them meet up again by coincidence. That's basically what happens anyways. So it makes me wonder why the pendant is even here in the anime. This isn't criticism, by the way. It's not like the anime really drags out any scene involving the pendant and the overall outcome of it is just fine. But there's something about the repurposing of this important item from the manga into something so mundane that I can't get over. The final thing I'll talk about before we move on to the next arc is Aish. As mentioned earlier, Aish is a manga-only character that's part of the squad tasked with searching for Sonju and Mujika. She is a demon-hating sharpshooter who doesn't understand human language and only talks in demon speak because she was kept in captivity by demons alongside 3 wolves. Norman and his Lambda crew rescued her, and since then she's been with them. Except that Aish wasn't in captivity. When she was a baby, a demon with a disfigured face just like her found her at a farm. Seeing something of himself in her, the demon decided to take her in and raise her as a daughter. Norman and his crew had killed Aisha's adoptive father when they found her, and since then she has sworn vengeance on all of them, only pretending not to understand human language so that she doesn't have to interact with them. I quite like the premise for this character. The reveal of her hating Norman and his crew and her goal to avenge the death of her adoptive demon father is great. It paints Norman as this character who is fundamentally unable to see demons as equals to humans, someone who believes himself a savior and not a murderer. I think Aish is a fantastic addition to the story, which is a shame because the story does absolutely fuck all with her. Norman and his crew never interact with Aish in any meaningful capacity, and she also just kind of fades out of relevance once the Seven Walls arc concludes. Norman and Aish see each other in chapter 160, where Norman says something in demon speak and Aish seems surprised by it. What does he say to her in this scene? I don't know, whatever you want him to say. Both what Norman says and what Aish thinks about it are never explained in the story. For all I care, Norman could have said, "Did you hear Silk Song is out?" and it would have had no impact on the story. In chapter 181, the final goddamn chapter of the entire manga, Norman mentions that Aish hasn't tried to kill him yet, and that's it. This could have been a great way to explore Norman's character from a new angle, but that opportunity is carelessly tossed out the window. How disappointing. Imperial capital battle marks a turning point in the Promised Neverland. It feels weird saying that when we're at chapter 146 out of 181, almost exactly 80% of the way through the story, but this arc sees a sharp change in direction that feels counter to a lot of things that have been established by the story until now. I haven't really spoken about this yet because I haven't had a need to, but I quite dislike Emma at this point in the story. The main reason for this is her insistence. I'm sure some people find Emma's insistence to be endearing, her ability to never say no and back down regardless of how great the adversity they face is. I didn't mind it that much when I read the manga for the first time. It did annoy me a little, but not enough that I would ever bring it up in a video. That all changed once we got to chapter 153. By 153, all the relevant characters have arrived at the capital, and Norman has executed much of his plans by now. He's unleashed the poison in the streets that degenerate demons, killed the 5 regents by manipulating a demon named Gillen and his clan, and has even decapitated and finished off the demon queen Lagra Valima herself. As he stands in the throne room amidst all of this death, Emma and Ray enter the room to confront him once more, and here, Emma says to Norman, "I don't understand why we have to murder and go to war when there's no need. I don't want them annihilated, and I don't want you to become a killer." Every time I read this line, it makes me cringe. This line is so tone-deaf beyond belief, and I cannot believe that this line actually exists. She is standing in a room full of corpses, blood is on everyone else's hands, and they've unleashed bombs and chemical weapons upon the innocent townsdemon. At this point, Norman and his crew are past the point of no return. Irreparable damage has been done. It would be a different story if they only took down the oppressors and left Demon Society an opportunity to properly restructure itself. Emma didn't even want to kill the royals and aristocrats perpetuating this cycle, right? Seeing Sonju, Mujika, and the everyday demons in that one settlement she explored moved Emma to such a degree that she could not accept a violent resolution. Norman, with the destruction he wrought upon the capital, has stepped far, far beyond this line. As Norman says himself, he put a crack in this world, a fatal fissure, one poke and it will shatter to pieces. But Emma sees all of this destruction, this antithesis of everything she believes in, and says, without a moment of hesitation, no. When she says no to Norman here, the way that I view Emma as a character fundamentally changed. She went from being insistent to being stubbornly in denial of reality. Now, this by itself is not a problem. This is not the first time that Emma has insisted upon her worldview and refused to budge in the face of a greatly opposing one. She did it back in Search for Minerva with Hugo, and also in King of Paradise upon reuniting with Norman, so what makes her doing it again here in the throne room insufferable? The difference lies in how people respond to her insistence. Hugo put up a hell of a fight in Search for Minerva. It was a fucking journey to get this man to cooperate with anything. In King of Paradise, we saw Norman having to carefully tread the conversation to avoid crushing Emma's vision without giving her any false hope. There was an actual interaction with the people she talked to. That doesn't happen here in the throne room. The throne room scene should have been the most climactic moment in the manga, the moment where the story reveals which path humanity will commit to. But man, this chapter just collapses in the most uninteresting way possible. Yes, there are 2 people in that room talking, but they are not talking to each other. In 153, whatever Norman says doesn't really matter because Emma is not listening. Anything he says either flies right by her or is talked over by Emma telling him exactly how he feels. You're lying to me, you're lying to yourself. You don't actually want to annihilate or massacre the demons. In fact, you're actually scared. And Norman's response to this is, "Yep, yeah, you're right, you got me. Sorry folks, my bad, I won't do it again, I promise." God damn it. At the start of the chapter, Norman tells Emma that the damage is done. It's too late and the demons cannot govern themselves anymore. You can't make peace, the world will shatter in one poke, thus spoke Darth Norman. But then, by the end of the chapter, he has completely folded and given up on his vision because Emma told him to do so. In its own way, this chapter is a direct response to 127, and I think that's why it annoys me so much. That chapter establishes the possibility of the relationship between Norman and Emma fracturing, that these 2 characters will go in separate and irreconcilable ways, and the manga leads up to this fairly well, I think. Norman moves upon the capital without hesitation, and the violence he unleashes here is both brutal and in line with his vision. The manga finally confronts that fact, only for this climax to amount to nothing as Norman provides very minimal pushback while Emma just talks over the entire room about how she's right and Norman's wrong. So her entire speech, which is supposed to be this emotional, sincere, heartfelt message that will finally melt the ice of Norman's frozen heart, comes off as not just ignorant, but completely delusional. Emma is so blinded by her ideals that she cannot possibly fathom an alternative outcome or a compromise to her perfect vision. As far as the Promised Neverland is concerned, Emma and Norman are not two diametrically opposed visions for the future of humanity in this world. Emma's vision is the one and only correct option, and Norman's is the wrong one. Anything that tries to go against Emma's vision will not be tolerated. In 127, I think the story did an excellent job at presenting two different paths for two different characters to take, with each character's reasons for their path being completely justifiable. It makes sense that Norman would want revenge against demons as a whole, and that Emma wants a more peaceful solution given the different experiences these two have been through since they each left the farm. But with 153, the story has put its foot down and stomps out one of these paths. What sucks about this entire situation is that, and as much as I hate to admit it, Emma's right. It's not too late, we can do something about it. Mujika's blood can solve all the problems that plague demon society. In fact, it's such a conveniently packaged solution that it kind of makes me mad, because it proves that Emma's argument is absolutely correct. It's a powerful solution since one injection is a permanent cure with no side effects, and it's also an accessible solution since Mujika is cooperative. Releasing the poison into the capital should have been this irreversible, catastrophic event where demons start to turn feral and turn on each other. But nope, share some of that evil blood and that problem is completely solved, and there are no lasting consequences to those that are cured. Back during King of Paradise, I talked all about how even if you did give the blood to everyone, it won't simply solve all the problems in the demon world in an instant. Surely some demons will still maintain an appetite for humans, and that demons aren't going to suddenly view humans as equals to demons overnight. Unfortunately, the manga just doesn't seem to care about these ideas anymore, and it doesn't give them the same consideration it did back during King of Paradise. Not here, and not later either. I do wonder what the story would be like if there was no magic cure-all evil blood. If there was no easy solution to this problem, would Emma be as comfortable with letting the demons degenerate? The complex relationship between humans and demons, as well as the societal problems that plague the demon world, can both be solved if the evil blood is distributed to the masses. It infuriates me how easy Emma's solution is in terms of both the efficacy of the actual solution itself and the lack of societal consequences the story needs to face. It's so goddamn perfect that it's lazy. This is the reason why I said way back when that The Promised Forest was an extremely important arc, with a reasonable argument to be maybe the most important arc to the overarching plot of The Promised Neverland, all simply because it introduced Mujika, and without her blood, there would be no conclusive way to say that Emma is correct. Do I think that it is fundamentally impossible for Norman to change his mind? Of course not. My problem is not that Norman changes his mind, it's the ease with which he does. Norman has not interacted with demons in the same way that Emma has. He has only ever met demons who treat humans as livestock. He's seen the horrible experimentations going on at the Lambda facility and destroyed several mass production farms where humans are raised in unspeakable conditions. If anything, Norman has more evidence to back up his vision compared to Emma's tiny sample size of Sonju Mujika and the town she passed through that one time. He does not see demons in the same way that Emma does, and should not be able to relate to anything Emma says about showing mercy and empathy for the demons. 127 does a great job with this, since Norman shows resistance to Emma's ideals without outright shooting them down. He's willing to let her explore her options without compromising on his own vision, but once Emma gets talking, he's more than willing to throw it all away. I would be more than happy to accept this outcome if Norman actually saw something that changed his mind. Maybe he gets a chance to sit down and talk to Sonju and Mujika. He could walk through the capital after killing the royals and see the suffering and destruction wrought by his poison and bombs. Maybe he kills an unimportant commoner demon with his bare hands and watches them beg for their life, causing him to realize that he made a mistake. The manga needs to give Norman an actual reason for him to change his mind. It just needs to give him anything to work with, but instead, we got nothing. It's like Norman has outlived his usefulness in the story. He got us to the climax and thus no longer matters as a character, so wrap him up and throws him aside so that we can move on. The anime's version of the throne room scene is better. As a matter of fact, I think it's much better than the manga's version. Earlier, I brought up the fact that the anime doesn't go to the capital and that the attack takes place in the demon settlement. This actually makes a massive difference in how the entire scene is framed because now Norman can personally witness the damage his actions have caused. Pointedly, this demon girl, as she cries because the whole village is burning down and everyone around her is turning feral, she bumps into Norman. Norman tells her that he's going to annihilate all demons, then tries to kill her with a knife. Her grandfather manages to arrive just in time to say her name, Emma, which causes Norman to hesitate, allowing the girl to run to her grandfather. As the poison spreads and the girl degenerates before his eyes while the grandfather is unaffected, Norman realizes that the grandfather has Wujika's blood in him, so he stabs the grandfather. The grandfather then uses his blood to cure his granddaughter of her degeneration. Norman looks at the blood on his hands as the girl pleads with her grandfather to run away. He looks around at the destruction in the village as he begins to doubt himself, and eventually, human Emma shows up. So that pretty much solves most of the problem I have with the throne room scene, right? Here, it's not something that happens instantaneously. Norman sees the suffering of the grandfather and granddaughter as a result of his actions. He sees the literal blood on his hands, and this causes him to hesitate. And this doesn't immediately make him change his art, but rather question why he's hesitating. He can't bring himself to continue down what he believed was the only possible path to take. The anime doesn't take much time to do all of this, but it actually makes his change of heart believable and shows proper character development. And the fact that this change comes entirely from within, I think, is also another improvement. In the manga, it feels like Emma tells Norman he's wrong, so he realizes he's wrong and gives up on his plans, but in the anime, it's more like Norman is pushed to the emotional brink as he watches the consequences of his actions play out, and the appearance of Emma is what pushes him over the edge. And later on, when Emma tells Norman that he looks like a small child trembling with fear, it actually makes more sense here in the anime. He actually was hesitating and trembling with the blood of the demons on his hands. Like, yeah, he is scared that the plan he poured his blood, sweat, and tears into is not the right choice. He is scared of inflicting further suffering upon demons. I also love the fact that Norman tells her to stay away, as if Emma's approach represents Norman accepting that his view of the future of humanity is flawed. It adds a great layer to the scene that the manga could never hope to replicate because Norman throws his worldview out the window in an instant there. It genuinely kind of fucking blows my mind how much of an improvement this scene is compared to the manga. It's night and day. This scene isn't just palatable or watchable, it's actually good. Let's bounce back to the manga to touch bases with some other things I don't like about the Imperial Capital Battle arc. None of these come close to how much I dislike 153, but these are still worth mentioning, I think. Let's talk about Queen Lagra Valima for a minute here. She is the temporary big bad antagonist of the arc, and I don't think she's very good. She's just kind of comes out of nowhere and is very one-dimensional. She's kind of cartoonishly evil and greedy, and even her backstory boils down to, since I was young, I always wanted to be evil and greedy. So no, I don't think that she's an interesting character, but I do think she serves a purpose. She's meant to be this ultimate representation of everything wrong with demon society, the greed of the ruling class, the very intentional and continued oppression of the lower class to ensure that the ruling class can remain in power. These are the very demons who control what even allows demons to form a society in the first place, the consumption of humans. Gilin, who showed compassion for the suffering lower class during his flashback, is effortlessly destroyed by the queen, this embodiment of greed, and by destroying the queen, you destroy everything that she stands for and rip out the diseased roots of the demon world. So that's all fine and dandy if you're Norman. Everything the queen stands for only goes to prove Norman's point and offers further justifications for his vision. Demon society is built on a rotten foundation, and its rulers can only exist upon a throne of human suffering. The only way to break free of this cycle of suffering is to destroy this rotten foundation and let demon society collapse with it. Even until the very last moment preceding her first death, the queen treats Norman like food and refuses to acknowledge him as a proper being. Meeting the queen should have made Norman double down on his vision, if anything, but unfortunately, Emma won't have any of that. She is kind of cool to look at when she goes full Slender mode, though. The queen is not in the anime, by the way. Another thing I dislike is how Rei completely ceases to exist as an independent being. He had his moments in King of Paradise, Seven Walls, and Search for Minerva, but ends up doing nothing once we get to the throne room. From here on out, he just functionally becomes nothing more than Emma's yes man, and it's quite disappointing to see how far he's fallen from his glory days. We'll swap back to the anime to talk about something in it that I don't like, which is the second pen cap. In the manga, Emma acquires a second pen cap at Goldy Pond from Minerva's pen, which gives her access to a whole bunch of new information. In the anime, we still need the information provided by the second cap, but we don't have a Goldy Pond to go pick it up from, so instead, we need to have Vilk deliver it to us. Vilk is the grandfather demon from earlier, mind you. Once the attack on the settlement has cooled off, Vilk and Demon Emma come to visit the children hiding in the Temple of the Evil-Blooded, where he delivers the second pen cap to her. He got this pen cap by finding it on a dying human that he randomly found in the forest. There's a whole bit about how Vilk realized in that moment that humans too have wills. Good for him, but it is kind of undercut by the fact that Vilk ate the guy. I think it's dumb that they acquired the pen cap that contains absolutely critical information, including the cure for the illness ailing the Lambda children, through a complete chance encounter. I would rather the story have been written to accommodate for there being no second pen cap. And here's two more little things from this scene at the temple I don't like before moving on. Number 1, Demon Emma apologizes to Norman because she heard about how demons treated humans horribly. But why are you the one apologizing? You watched Norman stab your grandpa and poison your neighbors and burn down your village. I really don't think you need to apologize to a guy who plotted all of that just because he's now flipped sides. I would rather you not say anything than apologize to someone who tried to eradicate your entire species. The whole moment just feels like an extremely hasty attempt at trying to make amends between Norman and demons as a whole. Number 2 is probably the most insignificant nitpick in this entire video, but why does a Temple of Evil Blood even exist? The eradication and suppression of the evil-blooded is a huge plot point in the story, so why would the royals not destroy what looks like a site of worship? Anyways, Return to Gracefield is the penultimate arc of The Promised Neverland, but we're just going to treat it as the final arc since the Human World arc is only 3 chapters long and adds little of substance. This arc isn't quite as bad as Imperial Capital Battle, but it's still pretty bad in several ways. If Capital was the fatal wound, then Return is the salt in it. Way back when, Emma promised that they would come back for the remaining kids in 2 years' time, and back in chapter 72, we learned that the high-class farms like Gracefield have an exit to the human world in them, so, as the title of the arc says, the kids return to Gracefield to finish the job. But there's still a lot of stuff that happens outside of Gracefield in this arc, so we're gonna talk about that first. Now that the capital has seen some shit, what happens next? Somebody needs to clean up the mess, and the kids are too busy returning to Gracefield to do that. The kids hand this responsibility over to Sonju and Mujika, who are promptly put up for execution by what remains of the royal court alongside everyone that has taken Mujika's blood to recover from Norman's degenerative poison. As they are moments away from being executed, a familiar face makes his comeback. I have not made a particularly big deal about Luvis in this video. I mentioned him back in Goldy Pond as the final boss demon, the one Yugo confronts to overcome his past. Killing Luvis was an enormous deal back then. He was the final demon, hyped up to be much stronger than the other demons, which he is, and they made it a point to kill the final boss of Goldy Pond. They even blew up Goldy Pond on the way out for good measure to make sure that he was dead as dead can be, but somehow Luvis returned. When the kids were fighting the queen in the throne room, the queen comes back with a nasty phase 2 where she gets back up and then melts. She really got him with that one. Here it's revealed that the queen has some special genetic mutation that gave her a second core. and that's fine. She's supposed to be the final boss demon, so it doesn't really bother me that they gave her some special gimmick to give her a twist, but it does bother me that they recycled this exact same twist 15 or 16 chapters later for Luvis. They did foreshadow that Luvis wasn't actually dead because his body is seen missing near the end of Goldy Pond, but I don't care. I don't care that there's proper justification for this character who was supposed to be dead being brought back, because the way they use him here is terrible. I didn't really speak about Luvis that much back in Goldy Pond because he's not a very deep character. He likes hunting humans for the sport, but hasn't had a good hunt in years. However, he gets his passion for hunting reignited when Emma appears and puts up more of a fight than any of the other children have in a long time. He is more interesting than just your stock standard demon, and I do like him and his very stylish fit and his little guy, but he's not some revolutionary reimagining of the archetype. So imagine my surprise when he rolls up out of nowhere and says that actually, the evil blood isn't evil. The old royalty was bad. Demolish all the farms, and Sonju and Mujika are, in fact, heroes to save your species. How convenient is it that this character came back with a changed perspective that just so happens to check off all the boxes necessary to make sure Sonju and Mujika aren't just saved, but also elevated to a position of high respect. This is just the same problems I had with Norman earlier, but with a different character. Once again, I'm not firmly opposed to the idea of Luvis having a change of heart, but the manga doesn't do any work to showcase this change of heart. I think it's doubly egregious when they reuse a character that was supposed to have died like 70 or 80 chapters ago, and he comes back out of nowhere with a completely changed demeanor. And just like Norman, his perspective is changed to be exactly what the story needs in that moment to make sure it can proceed unimpeded. To me, it feels like Luvis's purpose was changed somewhere between his death and reappearance. Given his missing body at the end of Goldy Pond, I do believe that he was intended to be brought back in some way, shape, or form, and maybe this is just a huge cope angle, but the way his reappearance is handled in the manga can't be right. It's just so conveniently timed and, more importantly, so efficiently done. Once Luvis's message is delivered, he just fucks off. He waves goodbye and leaves the story. He is not a character anymore, he's a plot device. I think Norman's character arc reached its intended outcome, as unsatisfying as the final stretch of it was, but I would hate to think that this was the intended outcome for Luvis, since he made a lot of good use out of his time in the spotlight back in Goldy Pond. Imperial capital battle and return to Gracefield feel quite rushed, and how Norman and Luvis are handled in these arcs is the biggest piece of evidence pointing to this, I think. Both characters are repurposed to solve problems that shouldn't be solved this quickly. How does Demon Society get back on its feet after a massacre has occurred and its royalty has toppled? How does humanity find a future in a world that is so opposed to their freedom? Just have characters say that these problems are solved, and then move on. How hard could it be? While we're on the topic of things being rushed, let's go all the way back to the Promised Forest. There were some details back then that felt like they were supposed to build up into something greater down the line, but either manifested into nothing or into something that seemingly contradicts their introduction in the Promised Forest. For example, the Wish Demon. Mujika says that if the children want to break the promise, then they will make an enemy out of the Wish Demon. In response, Sonju mentions that the Wish Demon is already their enemy. But when Emma finally meets the Wish Demon is nothing but cordial and entirely willing to talk things out with her. Getting to and through the 7 walls is an arduous task, but once Emma is through, she's able to create the new promise quite effortlessly. Maybe the Wish Demon was supposed to play a more antagonistic role in early iterations of the story instead of the neutral one we see in the final product. Who knows? One that is straight up weird to me is when Mujika thinks to herself while talking to Emma that their appearance has become warped in the last 1,000 years, they're referring to demons in this context. But no, it hasn't. Mujika and Sonju's forms definitely haven't changed because they've both imbibed the evil blood. We got to see some demons during a telling of the creation of the first promise, and there we got to see intelligent forms similar to the royal families of the present era because those intelligent forms are created as a result of eating humans. Once we learn of the ever-fluctuating nature of the demon form, that line about warped appearances just feels like it's in the wrong story. Once again, maybe there was something different early on in regards to the demon form compared to what we got by the end. And lastly, the one that baffles me the most is Sonju. One of the big reveals near the end of the Promised Forest is that Sonju actually wants to eat humans, and that's the reason why he wants the escaped children to thrive. Yet by the end, he seems to have no issues with just letting this dream of his slip away in order to create a new stable demon world. I don't actually have any real issues with this, but it does come off as strange to me. It's treated as this huge reveal, but when it comes time to turn that reveal into something, the story just kind of brushes it off and moves on. The thing about this story point is that I can see a weird avenue in which it could have been good. If the Promised Forest was the last time we ever saw Mujika and Sonju and they weren't critically important to the ending of the story, then I think it could have been fine. It could have been a way to send the children out into the wastelands on an ominous note, and something that just lingers in the back of the minds of the readers and viewers. The world is a big place, and it would be completely believable to me that the children would never run into these two nomadic demons ever again. Similarly, there's another Sonju moment where he goes back to deal with the hunter demons in the woods. Knowing what we know about Sonju and his royalty bloodline by the end of the story, it does make sense that he wouldn't want these hunter demons to find out about him and report back to the capital about an exiled royal wandering the woods. Or maybe he's killing the hunters because he doesn't want them to find the children and prevent his dream of hunting humans again. Or maybe it's both. It's a fascinating quirk of the story that I actually kind of like, but I'm not sure is intentional. I want to lean towards saying that it is intentional, but given how so many things in the Promised Forest seem to be repurposed later on down the line, I can't say for sure. Now that Mujika won't be executed, we need to do something with her character, so why not make her the new queen of Demon Society? One of the things Luvis declares while he's back is that Mujika will be the new queen of Demon Society. He doesn't actually give a reason for this, so the head priest that Sonju revived comes up and says that Mujika should be a queen because she's selfless, and everyone agrees. Once again, just the pinnacle of convenience set up by skipping all the headache-inducing parts. Let's elect a new queen with no prior political experience that we were calling for the execution of just moments ago because we've been told that she's nice. How lovely of the town's demons to just agree with everything they're listening to, by the way. It really makes pushing things along so much easier, and we wouldn't be here without them. As a reminder, all this stuff that happens outside of Gracefield during this arc doesn't happen in the anime. And now, back to Gracefield. The actual process of returning to Gracefield has some major differences. In the manga, it just sort of happens. They break into Gracefield and shit just starts going down. In the anime, there's a whole plot involving hot air balloons and Vincent radioing Gracefield to pretend he's selling out the kids while providing misinformation. A demon rebellion happens at the same time too, led by Vilk. I didn't really find it all that interesting, but I still do want to give it some props for at least doing something instead of nothing like the manga. The final antagonist of The Promised Neverland is Peter Rattray, the younger brother of James Rattray, aka William Minerva. I haven't really had a chance to talk about him until now because he just hasn't been a particularly relevant character up until this point. His name's been known for a while and he's made some sparse appearances, but the most important thing he's done was order the bunker raid, and most of that spotlight was stolen by Andrew. The background here is that a very, very long time ago, one Julius Rattray betrayed his fellows and established the promise with the demons, splitting humans and demons into two worlds in exchange for leaving a select group of humans behind for the demons to establish their farms with. However, Julius was selected by the Wish Demon to become the gatekeeper to these worlds, his bloodline now forever cursed to watch over the very thing he wanted to escape from. When James learned of Julius's treachery, he was horrified and vowed to help out the children. Meanwhile, Peter had the complete opposite reaction and thought, how wonderful! The Rattray clan protects the world, and Julius pushed aside his feelings to do the right thing. Peter vows to stop James, resulting in him having James killed, and when it turns out that James's last words were an apology to Peter, Peter doubles down on his worldview and promises to uphold the mission of the clan. I like this backstory. Peter comes off as cartoonishly evil sometimes, with him constantly calling the children food, but I like how he's positioned in the story regardless. I especially like that he doubles down on his worldview after getting his brother killed, and just how committed to the cause he is in general. Even as he dies, he refuses to admit that he was wrong. You would think the man would learn his lesson when he sees his brother's corpse, but if you asked Peter there then, he'd probably tell you that the lesson is that he wasn't committed hard enough. And in a story where characters like Norman and Luvis just completely flip their worldviews on a whim, I respect Peter's dedication a lot, and I think it leads to some good moments in this arc. In chapter 162, Peter refers to the kids as the children who never grew up, and I think this is such a fascinating descriptor to use. There's this implication that those seeking for a brighter future for humans in the demon world are believing in a fairy tale like children would, a futile belief in this fairy tale against the adults and the immovable grip they've had on this world for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's an evocative choice of words, and I like it quite a bit. Some other translations I've seen use the eternal children, but I don't think that hits as hard. In chapter 173, Peter is backed into a corner by the children. Emma, as she normally does, tries to talk him into becoming a good guy and coming with them to the human world, but Peter is having none of that. Peter warns the children that the human world is no different from the demon world, and while humans might not eat other humans, demons are a mirror to humanity. Then he kills himself. So this is true in two ways, right? Demons are literally a mirror of humans because demons are what they eat. They became intelligent and social creatures because they ate humans. But just like demons, there are good and selfless humans that live alongside evil and selfish humans, those that live for the betterment of all even if it costs themselves, and those that live for the betterment of themselves even if it costs everyone else, and all sorts of people in between. The human world isn't some untouched, untarnished paradise where every human will get to be free and happy. This isn't the first time the manga addresses this idea, given that there were mentions of how there is no guarantee that the human world is a truly safe haven, but somehow it just feels a little different when Peter says it because of his role as a gatekeeper and how closely he's worked together with demons all this time. I like how Peter is handled in Return to Gracefield, but he's unfortunately not entirely in the clear. At one point, Isabella, who is back, by the way, leads a group of sisters and surrounds Peter at gunpoint, and there are so many guns pointed at him, just an unbelievable number. Peter then screams and then runs right past all of them and gets away. This is just stupid. I don't even know what else to call it. How am I supposed to believe that not a single person fired at him when he tried to get away? It's not even like they fired and missed because he got really lucky. They just don't fire at all and he slips away no problem. If the intent was to add tension to the moment by having the bad guy get away, it does the complete opposite. The anime seemingly agrees on this part being stupid because they didn't put it in. The anime's treatment of Peter in Return to Gracefield is mostly the same otherwise. He tries to set off the shocking device in all the sisters but fails at doing so, but there isn't much else that's different. One thing I did notice was that when Peter kills himself using a knife, the knife is just completely pristine after the fact, which is just so strange to look at. So once all the Peter business is done and dusted, we get to see Phil again. Phil is a weird character, not because of anything he does, but because of the things he doesn't do. It would be disingenuous of me to say that this character does nothing, but I also don't think he does enough to warrant the number of times his name gets brought up in the manga. For how little of him we see, his name comes up quite regularly, nowhere near as frequent as any of the escaped kids that are actually doing anything, but a lot for someone who isn't critical to the post-escape story of The Promised Neverland, and I don't get it. It's like the story is setting him up to come back in a big way, and then he never does. The story does try with chapter 100. This chapter gives us an unprompted look into how Phil's doing back at the farm. I can't even begin to imagine the torture of being the only person to know the truth about the farms amongst your peers. Everyone is just having the time of their lives at the house, while Phil is completely aware of the impending fate that looms over all of their heads with nothing he can do about it. It's a truly horrifying idea that gets even better when Andrew comes to visit Phil to have a word with him. And the best part about this is that we never get to learn about what these two talk about. It simply cuts back to the escaped kids looking for Cuvitidala, and that's the end of that. It's a great cliffhanger on its own, made even better by the fact that the story doesn't revisit it, so the reader is left wondering about what could have happened to Phil. Andrew and his raiders attack the bunker not long after this, so who knows what role Phil played in that. It's a great chapter, but does this alone justify Phil getting so much more attention compared to all of the other minor kids? I don't think so. Emma is the one who brings him up a lot, so if the answer to the question is that he's Emma's favorite kid, so she thinks about him the most, then I wouldn't have a rebuttal to that, I guess, even if that answer doesn't clear how iffy I feel about Phil. The anime does give him something active to do by having him guide the farm children to the elevator to meet up with Emma and her group once they've broken into Gracefield, but that position could have been filled by any of the escaped kids who snuck into the group of farm children. In fact, it probably would have made more sense for them to guide the children because they presumably already know the layout of Gracefield if they were able to get this far in. Maybe Phil too was changed as a result of the story trying to rush to completion from Imperial Capital Battle onwards. The best thing that I can come up with is that he's supposed to be a representation of all the children left behind at the farms. So whenever Phil's name is mentioned, they're talking about all of these kids as a whole, but even that isn't a particularly satisfying answer to me. As mentioned earlier, another character that Return to Gracefield welcomes back is Isabella. She has usurped the position of grandmother and is ready to round up the children once more to fulfill the wishes of her demon overlords. Except, surprise, she betrays Peter after having grown sick of being subservient to the demon order and points her gun at him. And once Peter is out of the picture, she joins the children back where it all began to celebrate their victory and cry tears of joy. That's fine and everything, good for her. But the catch is, she dies. A random demon rolls up out of nowhere on the celebrating children and tries to kill them, only for Isabella to take the hit instead, and she bleeds out on the spot while all of her children surround her and tell her how much they love her. This has gotta be one of the most forced deaths I've ever seen or read in anything. Just some unnamed demon rolls up into the shop and kills her. It's not even like the case with Andrew where the seemingly random nature of his death at least has a point to it. This just feels like the Promised Neverland killed a good guy because that hasn't happened in a while, so why not? The forced nature of the kill is so overbearing on the chapter that nothing else comes through. The only good guys whose losses are given any attention are Norman when he's shipped out, and then Hugo and Lucas when they take their last stand in the bunker. These losses have some proper weight to them since these three characters all played very important roles in the moments leading up to their deaths. But when Isabella returns, she kind of doesn't do anything. She intimidates the children for a bit, then leads what seems like a very poorly trained group of sisters that lets Peter get away, and then dies. And the manga treats this death with the same gravity that Norman getting shipped out or the last stand in the bunker had. 177 is unbearably sappy with all of the children surrounding her and them talking about how they realized while they were outside that Isabella truly loved them the entire time. That second thing especially gets on my nerves because Isabella is just not a relevant character once they escape the farm. I'm not going to claim that my notes were impeccably accurate or anything, but there's a huge gap between chapter 37 and 162 where she just isn't brought up. So that part of Isabella's death just comes off as ridiculously hollow. The deaths of Norman, Lucas, and Hugo also had proper lead-ups into them so that there's a building sense of dread that makes the deaths feel more impactful. Meanwhile, Isabella just dies because a random demon wasn't in a good mood and, sudden deaths can be written well if I care about the character. Andrew's death is really good for that reason, but because of how underwhelming her reappearance is, it really does feel like they're just killing her to fill a quota or something. The anime spares her life and sends her out to the human world, and it also does preview her return a tiny bit by showing Isabella locked up in a cell and being brought an offer by a demon. Is that any better? I guess, since I just feel indifferent about her return in the anime compared to the negativity in the manga. Honestly, maybe she shouldn't have been brought back at all. At the very end of it all is the Human World arc. Clocking in at a whopping 3 chapters long, I don't really think this contributes much to anything. It turns out that, as a part of the wish to send all humans back to the human world, Emma is forcefully separated from her family and loses all memories of them. She's teleported into the middle of nowhere as opposed to everyone else who gets teleported close to civilization. Those that are taken to civilization insist that they must find Emma no matter what it takes, and they eventually do. There's some friction between Emma and the rest when they reunite, but Emma realizes that she feels like she always wanted to see all of them, which directly segues into a happy ending. So there's nothing wrong with this, but much like other things, it also doesn't add anything. By the end, all we learn is that Emma loves her family dearly, which is cute, but it's not anything new. So the ending does really make these human world arc chapters feel pretty redundant. At first, I thought they were going to try and shoot for a bittersweet ending where Emma and the rest of the kids are forever split apart and Emma's memories were never restored. I don't really know if I would have liked that or not. I don't think I'd hate it, but I don't think I'd love it either, mostly because Imperial Capital and Return to Gracefield had left me so thoroughly disappointed that I don't think any ending could have turned it around. The anime's ending also has the human world, but not the human world arc. Instead of Emma being taken away alone, she chooses to stay behind in the demon world with some of the other kids in order to change the promise like they do in the manga. And they do accomplish this over the course of a slideshow. Look, animation is hard and the industry is brutal, but this is pretty fucking bad. Whenever I make these videos and only show still images instead of actually running footage, I always feel a little bad about it, but when I'm showing some of these screenshots from episode 11 of season 2, you aren't missing a whole lot. So anyways, in that final slideshow, they decide to cram in anything and everything. The kids are going to school, Dawn and Phil are on the subway, Vincent's a doctor now, they're going hiking and trekking through the forest, enjoying a campfire, and all of this was totally fine by me, until they showed the Wish Demon, and then Sonju resurrecting the High Priest, and then the Imperial Capital, and then Bujika becoming the Queen. I think they just shouldn't have bothered with these shots at all. Similar to the Poacher's Room being put in the anime without Yugo's presence to contextualize it, this just feels kind of insulting. Let them just remind you of all these things that were left on the cutting table. They really should have committed to the different ending they came up with. If they had ended it with Emma's group staying behind, that would have been fine. As unpolished as it is, I do like that idea for an ending, and it's not a bad way to salvage what little of the anime that they could. But then they made what was possibly the worst decision ever and reminded everyone of what they didn't adapt. This sucks in pretty much every imaginable way. For manga readers, it's just one last slap in the face to remind you of how badly the anime butchered so much of the manga. For anime-only people, it's gotta be some of the most confusing shit ever to watch with zero context. Like, what the fuck is... what is a dragon doing here? Part of me wishes... why is there a dragon in the manga anyways? Part of me wishes I watched the anime first so I could have experienced that confusion firsthand. Do I think that everything past season 1 in The Promised Neverland deserves a proper new adaptation that covers everything and does it justice? I don't know. It would be cool to see stuff like Goldy Pond, especially the final showdown against Luvis, be properly animated and voiced. I would love to see characters like Yugo and Lucas and Andrew be brought to life on screen, but the story starts really rushing through everything as it gets to the end, and I don't even mind some of the decisions made by the currently existing adaptation. If there was a brand new adaptation that was much more faithful to the source material, I honestly probably wouldn't care. I would have to go into it already knowing how poorly the story ends, and I can't see myself getting excited for something that I know is going to horrifically fall apart by the end. Looking back, the only thing I can think of anymore is, what happened here? Why do the final few arcs of the manga feel like the story is sick of itself and just wants to be done? Of all the things they could remove in the anime, why did they choose to remove Goldy Pond and cause all those rippling consequences? Were some of the changes in the writing of the anime actually made as a response to how events played out in the manga? I know I said at the start of the video that we'll set speculations aside, but it's hard not to when seeing how some things fall apart. Maybe the answers to these questions are out there somewhere in some bygone interview or Twitter post, and everyone involved with this has simply moved on. Just another addition to the ever-growing catalog of long-forgotten animes. That ending was dog shit, but regardless, thanks for watching. As per usual, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking it and maybe even subscribing to the channel. Every little bit goes a long way. You know the routine. But aside from that, here's the usual spiel of whatever random stuff that came up in my head while I was working on the video, which there actually isn't that much for this video, surprisingly. The only thing I want to talk about real quick is I hate how much recap is in this video. I don't actually know if there's more recap in this one compared to my usual output, but it certainly felt that way while working on it. I tried to keep things concise, but I don't think I did a very good job at it, because if I did do a good job at it, I don't think I'd feel like shit about it. But I felt like context was important for a lot of different points throughout the video, and trying to talk about some of the stuff without providing said context just didn't feel right. I could have just completely done away with any recap with the excuse that I did give a spoiler warning, but that also just didn't feel right to me. Maybe I'm more of a serial recapper than I realize, and this is just the first time that it dawned on me, but I don't know. I'm sure there's a solution out there that solves both of my problems regarding the recapping of this video, but I don't think I'm a good enough writer to figure that out, alas. The next video is going to be the Lies of P DLC one. Some work on it has already been done since I've been jotting down notes since the DLC's release. It shouldn't take anywhere near as long as this video took to come out. This video took way longer than it really should have to fully be completed. I remember telling myself back in August that I was going to be done with the video by the end of that month, but look at where we are now. Anyways, that's it for me. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video. Double thank yous to anyone that is listening to me right now, all the way up until the bitter end. And that's it. I'll see you in the next one.